What if the most powerful man in Russia never stopped working undercover? What if a single conversation in a cold German alley rewrote the way he saw the West and himself forever? In today's story, we go beyond the headlines and into a hidden chapter of Vladimir Putin's past. A chapter sealed in silence, but written in a language he once tried to forget. This isn't just about KGB files or Cold War secrets. It's about a man who chose silence, not because he didn't understand, but because it gave him power. And once you hear what happened in room 32, you'll never look at him the same way again. The language he stopped using. It was 1987 in Dresden. Winter was sharp that year, sharp enough to cut through coats, through uniforms, through silence. The Soviet compound looked like something out of a Cold War photograph. Gray buildings, fog in the morning, red flags limp from the cold. And inside one of those buildings, a young KGB officer named Vladimir Putin sat alone, translating. Not Russian. Not German. English. He was good at it, too good, some would later say. His pronunciation was clean, almost American. He'd learned it during his Leningrad University years, obsessively reading spy novels and technical manuals. English, to him, was a tool, efficient, unemotional, useful. That day, he was preparing briefing notes for an urgent meeting. It was standard protocol. A diplomat from the UK embassy had been spotted meeting with a West German asset. The Soviets suspected something unusual, not just espionage, but internal betrayal. Putin's job wasn't to act. It was to listen. The meeting was to be held in room 32, a place few outsiders entered, and fewer still talked about. Inside, the walls weren't thick, but they didn't need to be. The silence was enforced by memory, not bricks. He entered early. The room was dim. No windows. A single wooden table, for chairs, a tape recorder, and a folder marked Priority Red. He opened it. Inside, a photo of the British diplomat. A transcript of intercepted calls. And a single, unsigned document, in English. Handwritten. He froze. The handwriting. He'd seen it before. Not in training. Not in archives. In a personal letter. One he'd kept from his early university days. A letter from a professor he admired. Trusted. Someone who'd recommended him for KGB recruitment. Someone who, apparently, had written a report for MI6. He stared at the page for what felt like hours. His stomach felt hollow. His throat dry. This wasn't just betrayal. It was disorientation. Like watching a familiar face blur into a stranger's. Then came the knock. 3 senior officials entered. No names were spoken. The meeting began. English was used, deliberately, testing, parsing, pushing. Putin translated every word. Accurately. Flawlessly. But inside, he wasn't listening. He was unraveling. And when it was over, when the others left and the door shut behind them, he sat alone again. The paper still in front of him. The handwriting still there. He reached into his coat pocket. Pulled out a matchbook. Lit a match. He didn't burn the report. He burned the letter. The one from the professor. The one that had once inspired him to believe in duty. He watched the flames consume the signature. The lines. The encouragement. And then he whispered something in English, his last known sentence in the language. You lied to me. The name he erased from memory. The next morning, Putin arrived at the office early. Earlier than usual. Earlier than everyone. The snow hadn't been cleared from the steps, and his boots left the only tracks. He didn't mind. Solitude made it easier to think, and harder for anyone to ask questions. He opened the same file drawer where the letter had once been stored. Now empty. Not just the letter, his entire personal archive. Gone. Someone had cleared it out. Or maybe he had, and the absence just felt foreign. Either way, a part of him was missing. Down the hall, he passed Colonel Orloff, who usually greeted him with a nod. Today, nothing. Just eyes that looked but didn't register. Like they had both been to the same place last night, and agreed to forget it. In the records room, he sat before the microfilm machine. His fingers, numb from the cold, searched mechanically through the reels labeled foreign contacts, internal candidates. And there it was. Alexei Tarabankov. University of Leningrad. Department of International Politics. British sympathies suspected. Contact with agency representatives unconfirmed. Next to it, a red stamp. Neutralized, 1985. But that wasn't the date that mattered. It was the one scribbled below it, in pencil. Filed by V. Putin. He blinked. No memory of doing that. No recollection of ever writing that name on any official report. Had someone forged it? Or had he? He leaned back in his chair, hearing the faint hum of the building's heating system clicking on and off. That noise would stay in his head for years. The rest of the day was silent. Unusually so. Dresden station wasn't always active, but there was always some kind of chatter, messages to decode, couriers to debrief. Today? Nothing. Like the entire building was holding its breath. He skipped dinner. At home, his apartment was dim and sparse, just as he liked it. No photos. No reminders. Just function. But that night, something pulled him toward the bookshelf. Not to read. To remove something. A first edition of a Russian English lexicon. A gift from Alexei Tarabankov on the day Putin was accepted into the KGB program. He held it for a long moment. Then opened to the inside cover. In language we find the truth. A.T. He tore out the page. Then another. Then another. Not violently. Just methodically. One by one, until the book was just a cover with loose strings. The next day, he requested reassignment to Moscow. He cited strategic reorientation, but the truth was simpler. He needed to leave English behind. In Moscow, he began avoiding Western liaisons. Refused translation roles. When required to speak English, he would respond in German. Or Russian. Or silence. It became habit. And then principle. And then identity. When asked about his multilingual talents years later, he'd smile politely and say, "I never needed English. I had other tools." But it wasn't about need. It was about trust. Language had become a doorway, and someone had walked in, uninvited. From that moment on, English was no longer a language he used. It was a memory he refused to speak. The German intercept. By early 1988, Putin had already built a reputation inside the Dresden station: precise, obedient, never late, never loud. He didn't drink with the others. He didn't joke about the West. And he never, ever brought up his language skills again. But one day, that past came back, not through memory, but through frequency. It started with an intercepted radio message, flagged by a junior analyst who almost skipped it due to poor signal quality. But something about it, specifically the rhythm, caught the analyst's ear. He passed it to Putin's desk, unsure what made it important. Putin played it once. Then twice. The static was heavy. The voice weak. But it was in English. And beneath the words, something strange. The cadence. The phrasing. It felt familiar. He enhanced the tape using a Soviet audio filter device. Still scratchy, but clearer now. Return code 483 to primary. Immediate exfiltration. Contact compromised. Repeat, compromised. Tell AT it's over. He stopped the tape. AT. He didn't breathe. Didn't blink. just let the two letters hang in the air like smoke. It couldn't be a coincidence. There was no active Western agent with those initials in their Dresden files. But there was once. Alexei Tarabenkov. Officially neutralized in 1985. But that file was thin. Too thin. No termination details. No location. Just a note, handled. Handled by whom? The same question must have echoed in Putin's mind as he stared at the recorder. He checked the tape's origin. Triangulated between Leipzig and a small town near Chemnitz. A no-man's land for spies, too quiet for surveillance, too noisy for suspicion. That night, he drove there himself. No orders. No backup. The town was dark, the streets slick with half-frozen rain. He parked near an abandoned train station and walked along the tracks. His boots crunched gravel in time with his heart. Then he saw it. An old man, sitting on a bench under a rusted awning. No umbrella. Just a hat pulled low. He wasn't moving. Putin approached slowly. No gun. No badge. Just tension. As he neared, the man looked up. Blue eyes. Gray beard. And in flawless Russian. Still burning letters, Volodya? Putin stopped cold. The voice. The face. The memory. It was him. Tarabenkov. But how? Alive. Unchanged. Sitting like a ghost summoned by a language he tried to erase. Putin said nothing. Tarabenkov stood. He wasn't armed. Wasn't afraid. I knew you'd find the tape. I left it for you. Still, Putin said nothing. I was an MI6, Tarabenkov added. Not really. It was all theater. Layers over layers. You know how it works. Putin's jaw clenched. I did it to protect you. You were too pure back then. Too idealistic. They'd have chewed you up and spit you out. I gave you a way in. A long pause. You're welcome. Putin didn't respond. Then, with slow precision, he took something from his coat pocket, a photo. Of the original letter. Of the handwriting. He showed it to Tarabenkov. Explain it. Tarabenkov looked, sighed, and said only. I wrote that to recruit you. Not for Moscow. Not for London. For the truth. Putin folded the photo. Put it back in his coat. And walked away. No threats. No arrest. No report. Just distance. By the time he got back to Dresden, the snow had started again. Soft, thick, and quiet. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of what was said. But because for the first time since Room 32, he understood that truth wasn't about words. It was about who got to speak them. And who stayed silent forever. Room 32 revisited. 2 weeks passed. Putin filed no report. Mentioned nothing about Tarabenkov. Deleted the intercepted tape. Burned the transcript. And yet, every time he walked past the third floor at headquarters, he glanced at Room 32. That door hadn't opened since the night he'd been summoned there and found himself face to face with a silence that still echoed. But now, curiosity was no longer passive. It was active. And it pulled. He waited for the building to empty out late one Friday. Just him, a single janitor, in the ghosts. The hallway was dimly lit. The floor creaked in places it hadn't before. Room 32's door was locked. No surprise. But he had the key. Not officially, of course. Just a duplicate made years earlier in case of security malfunction. He inserted it slowly. Turned. And entered. The room smelled the same. Dust, old varnish, a trace of gun oil. The table at the center was gone, replaced by a filing cabinet and a single chair facing a wall. But the strangest thing wasn't what had changed, it was what hadn't. The walls still had the same pinholes where a map had once hung. The ceiling still had the small black ring that once held a microphone. And on the wall, faint but visible, a handprint. Right-handed. Slightly smudged. He walked over and placed his own hand against it. Perfect match. He sat in the chair. Faced the wall. Closed his eyes. And remembered. That night. That voice. You were never supposed to hear English in this room again. A command? A threat? A prophecy? He opened his eyes and stood. Walked to the filing cabinet. Opened the top drawer. Empty. Second drawer. Empty. Third drawer. A file. Just one. No label. He pulled it out, opened it, and there it was. A transcript. Dated the same night as his last appearance in room 32. It wasn't just his report. It was a full audio log. His conversation with Tarabenkov. The one that never officially happened. His blood ran cold. Someone had been recording. Not the West. Not a rogue agent. The KGB. From the inside. And then he saw it, the signature on the bottom of the log. Colonel Orlov. The same man who hadn't looked at him the next morning. Who'd gone strangely quiet since then. Who was promoted 6 months later and transferred to Moscow for exemplary service. Putin stared at the page. So it was all part of a test. The letter. The silence. The disappearance. And his response? It was what they'd been watching all along. He turned the page. There was a final comment, handwritten in red ink. Subject exhibits high-level compartmentalization. Loyalty intact. Recommend deeper integration. Deeper integration? What did that even mean? He dropped the file. Stepped back. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. Not haunted, engineered. He walked out, locked the door behind him, and threw the key into the building's incinerator. Let them come back and wonder where it went. Back at home, he poured himself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. Instead, he took out a notebook, unlabeled, plain black leather. And on the first page, he wrote one sentence. They saw me. And still chose me. Then he closed the book, locked it away, and didn't look at it again for 12 years. By then, he wouldn't need notebooks. He would have an entire country to write his story on. The English sentence. Years passed. The wall came down. The archives opened. Moscow changed. But some files remained sealed, and some rooms never reopened. Putin didn't return to Dresden after 1990. Not officially. But once, in 1998, a source from the Old East sent a small box to Moscow. No return address. Just a note, you left this behind. Inside the box, a cassette tape. Unlabeled. He knew what it was before pressing play. The voice was older. Raspy. But unmistakably Tarabenkov. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. It means the last pieces have been moved. You were never meant to be ordinary, Volodya. And neither was I. But only one of us understood what the stage really needed. One actor. Silence. Then, a single sentence. In English. You lied better than I ever could. Then static. He didn't play the tape again. Instead, he placed it in a safe beneath his desk at the presidential administration. Wrapped it in a cloth. Locked it. For years, he never touched it. But every now and then, late at night, he'd stare at that safe. As if the tape inside had a pulse. As if it still whispered. Because deep down, he knew. That room in Dresden hadn't been a test. It had been an initiation. The silence wasn't punishment. It was permission. To build, erase, rebuild again. To speak only when speaking served the story. To wield language not as truth, but as weapon. And that first lie? The very first? It wasn't to Tarabankov. Or to Orlov. Or even to the system. It was to himself. That he could walk away from English. That he could bury a tongue and never feel its shape again. But every word since, every speech, every pause, every cold sentence, was touched by that moment. And so when foreign leaders tried to gauge him in meetings, when translators leaned in a little too late, when he raised a brow at poorly phrased questions, they thought he didn't understand. They thought he needed help. But he didn't. He remembered every word, every sentence, every silence. He just chose not to answer. Because once, in a room without witnesses, he made a vow. I will never speak their language again. And in doing so, he made sure they would always speak about him. Not with him. About him. Wondering. Guessing. Projecting. He became their myth. By becoming their silence. The truth is never loud. And sometimes, the loudest power is the man who never needs to speak. If this story made you see a different side of power, secrecy, or history, don't forget to like the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold chapters from the lives of world leaders. And remember, sometimes the story isn't what's said. It's what's never said.